What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Good to see you, gang. Been not too long. We were on twice earlier this week. I hear a weird echo in here today. Joker just bailed out too. I think I scared him. Missed yesterday's show. Day just got away from me with the crazy slate that was going on. A lot of teams in action. Bunch of teams on back-to-backs preparing for today's back-to-backs, upcoming cup games, etc. So just got a little bit ugly yesterday. Today, I switched the order of operations up. I got to get out of here in a little bit to finish off the hockey slate. Big hockey slate tonight. But just a little 3-game basketball slate to talk through. So we'll talk through that for whoever shows up. A handful of people coming in the door right now, it looks like. We'll see what attendance looks like today. Another kind of a pop-up type show. We got to get this thing on a more regular schedule, which working on. Hopefully, as things normalize, the model got a big update at the beginning of the week, so we're tracking in on some of this year's numbers a little bit more, and more and more as the sample sizes grow. But a really good looking one today for the little 3-gamer. It's already very messy. Got some missing pieces and parts. Again, 3 of the 6 teams on back-to-backs, so that creates all kinds of havoc. No real pay-up stars on this entire slate, which is kind of interesting. 9,200 for book on the FanDuel slate. I believe eyeballing it here. 95 for Spider, 94 for Siakam. And then on DraftKings, 97 for Siakam, 85 for Scotty, 73, 86 for Mobley, Dyson Daniels. No major, 10K, 12K type stars. So just kind of an interesting board to run through. Start us off here as people start walking in the door. What's going on, Rabbit Hole? Good to see you, buddy. Pull up the old Vegas board. We'll run through some ins and outs real quick. And then we'll just talk through some of these percentages, and we'll be out of here 5 o'clock-ish, somewhere around there. So the Raptors are in Cleveland to play the Cavs. Cavs getting, they played very, very shorthanded last night. They're getting several of those guys back, but no Lonzo tonight, no Darius Garland tonight. Kind of creates some interesting opportunities, as you can see there in the share distributions on your board. Cavs are favored by 7.5 at home in a 238.5 point total game that doubles as the top of the board. Pieces and parts at worst from the Raptors side. Those 4 guys are always going to be in play at the top of their rotation. Atlanta against Utah, definitely an interesting spot. Atlanta favored by 2 on the road, 234 point total there. Trey's still out, obviously, but we get some upside pieces out of Atlanta, and we get some guys just looking very, very good in a spot that gooses their total a little bit as far as what we would expect scoring wise, per minute wise. The Utah side, I'm sure we'll get some contributions there, and then we get Indy against Phoenix, and we're getting definitely some pieces and parts out of Indy. 4.5 points spread in that one. Favoring the Suns, 232.5 point total on the board there. Suns, I'm sure we get some Booker. He jumped out at me as I was looking at some of those salaries. 40%-ish on FanDuel, 21%, but below the field on DraftKings. But definitely some interesting spots to go to on this one. As far as those ins and outs go that I mentioned, no probables. I guess technically everybody's probable until the slate starts, but no official designations as probable. Just 2 questionables. Both coming out of Toronto, Sandro Mamushvili and Colin Murray-Boyles. So something to keep an eye on there. There's already no Jonathan Mobo. He's down in the G League. And then outs. Agbaji's out. Mobo's out in the G League. Lonzo Ball, Darius Garland, as mentioned, are both out. Max Strus also out. Jalen Tyson also out, creating a little bit more of a vacuum for minutes for Cleveland there. Naftali Dante, Nikola Derisic, Kristaps Porzingis, Trae Young, Kyle Anderson, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler, George Niang, Johnny Furphy, Tyrese Halliburton, Quentin Jackson, Cam Jones, Cody Martin is out, Benedict Mather and Obi Toppin continue to be out, Jalen Green and Mark Williams are getting the night off. So a lot to work with there, a lot to go through. Some of those spots creating some tremendous value, particularly Craig Porter on the DraftKings board, notably Okongwu getting a massive share at 6,200. He's not exactly like value priced, but a very solid mid-range price at that 62. On FanDuel at 64. He's getting into most of the lineups that went through in the sim in the top 150. Porter is a different play across sites. FanDuel's got him at 42, which is not an unreasonable price at all. Just feels like we don't need the savings on FanDuel the way that everything is priced. If you look at that board, like we are still getting all the pieces we need in abundance. The expensive parts, the upper mid-range guys, when you've got as much salary as we do on FanDuel to work with, those are not difficult prices to just kind of cram all those guys in without like a 5-figure guy to pay up for here. So we need him. We can use him. He's in 17% of our lineups, and that is ahead of the field on FanDuel. But at a 4.80 value score, when we're looking for 5 to be, a true indicator of value, that's a very different play than the 6-1-3 when we're looking for 5.5 that he's showing over on the other side of the board over here on DraftKings. We got him in 61% of the lineups. That's double-ish, triple-ish the projected ownership that he's gone in against here. And I think that ran at basically similar projections as far as the fantasy points. So I'm very curious as to why he didn't come up quite as much in their ownership run as he's hitting the board here, because I think at 21 minutes, I've got him conservatively projected. I think there's an easy path to more minutes than that, given who's not there today, given what they've used him like when they've needed him. So it's a really interesting looking spot on a 3-game slate. Even in his typical 16-8 a night, he's a 0.85 guy, 0.95, excuse me, on DraftKings this year, 0.85 last year. That would be a somewhat interesting $3,300 guy just to mix in on a 3-game slate anyway. And when we're giving him additional minutes for the absence of teammates, that just looks like a really good building block on DraftKings and a potentially critical one. So definitely interested there. I think the Okongwu spot is just kind of staring us in the face. Got him at 32 minutes, and he's showing major value. Dude's playing at 1.06 this year. We've seen upside beyond that, 1.12 for the year last year with a number of big games when he steps into additional minutes. We typically see him perform pretty well. He's going to be super, super chalky, but I think he's unavoidable. I think he's very, very good chalk. Welcome into everybody who's just finding their way in the door. We'll dive into some position by position, just taking kind of the top end of the board here. I think there's going to be a lot of commonality of builds around some of this stuff. Probably going to pay with the nature of today's slate to maybe open things up in your building process a little bit more than normal, as far as like if you set min salary thresholds. If you just take lineups out of sim, you're just taking the top off the top and whatever. But if there are min salaries involved in how you build, definitely a day that pays to open it up. You don't want to go totally nuts. You still want to spend a fair chunk of your salary and come up optimal and build toward that path. But just given the way that this slate falls, you don't want to be saying like, all right, only give me on FanDuel, especially, only give me lineups 200 short of the salary cap. That's not going to work well today. You probably see that immediately when it cuts you short on your build request. But let's get into some of this. Tiz is here. What's going on, Tiz? Let me yell at the dog real quick. Joker, come here, buddy. I can hear him like going after something in the other room. Come here, Joker. Come lay down, pal. Come on. Yeah, just chill. Anyway, so good afternoon to the folks who are coming in. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel as you get a chance. The website, if you're not familiar, rotoscouts.com. Everything's under $1 a day. Get in behind the paywall for basketball, hockey, and football projections, all inclusive, no per sport fees. So check that out. Give some love to acemine.io too. That's where the sims run. I take our data and put it into their sim machine, and out comes the percentages. It's a pretty great product over there. Very affordable. They cross over all the sports optimizers and sims, or all the main sports anyway. So you get a lot of bang for your buck out of acemine.io as well. So let's get into some position by position. We'll, since we're short slate, let's start on the back end again. Did this the other day. Somewhat straightforward through the top end of the board. Okongwu was just soaking up tons and tons of shares. He's got the multi-position on FanDuel, which is very valuable on this slate. Center only on DraftKings. Obviously, you got the util spot to work with. You can move pieces around the board a little bit on DK, but opening that up so that he's not center only on FanDuel is pretty aggressively big. We've got Nurk on the board. We've got Richards on the board that we can get to. In those center shares, it looks like Nurk is dominating the center only shares when we're heads up against Richards. This kind of makes sense. Nobody else who's center only is getting shares. So we're getting like half or 60%-ish going to those two center only. And then the rest of that rotation just going through the extra shares of these guys. which is very, very straightforward. And some of Colin Murray Boyles, assuming he's out there. You could see some swing on minutes. Iguodaro at 20 minutes did not come up at 3,600 on FanDuel, power forward center. While Nick Richards at 18 minutes, a better per minute guy, did. So that's just something to keep in mind if you see things swing as far as where minutes are distributed there. If you see me knock, Richards down to 16 minutes, he comes up a little less valuable. But if you see him climb to, 20 and change, he becomes a little bit more valuable. Iguodaro would have more to overcome as far as seeing additional minutes at his per minute is 0.66 this year, 0.73 last year, 0.66, 0.70 last year on DraftKings. Let me zip this up a little bit. Screwing myself up as which columns I was looking at there. So he would need to climb to 26-ish, somewhere in that territory to really start picking up shares. On DraftKings, same story. Not really getting much of him. Not really getting much of these guys, but onesie, twosie shares on Filipowski, Larry Nance, Mamu. Mamu's kind of interesting. Just 2%. That's below the field. I've got him in for 18-ish minutes. He's played 1.0 basketball this year, 1.15 last year. He's a capable guy. He is somebody who could get in there and definitely bend the slate a little bit, and especially if he picks up a little bit of additional time. Also questionable to play. So there's a little flex on the Mamu spot. I would keep an eye on him. Nance probably less so. I think just in 20 minutes, that's just an is who he is spot. 3,900, he's perfectly fine to use as a lever to get to some of the other upside plays on DraftKings. He's only 3,900 over there. We got him 3% of the times, gently below the field. Field's probably in the, just under 10 range or maybe just over. But I don't think he's looking crucial. 0.77 this year, but he's capable of more. 1.0 for this season last year. On FanDuel at 4,100, he did not come up in our top 150. Doesn't look particularly relevant. You can play him. You can play a lot of guys. Anybody upwards of, let's say, 16 minutes, that's kind of a magic number in the middle. On a 3-gamer, at least there's a realistic opportunity for them to score you 20-plus FanDuel points or 20-plus fantasy points, which on a day like today could have value, especially at the right price. If you're getting that from a guy who costs 7,500, you're probably shot in the foot. But all the cheap guys with any semblance of realistic minutes are on the board. So that's not to say that you can't play Larry Nance on FanDuel. At 4.21 value, it doesn't look good. He's not going to naturally come through a lot, but you can stick him into a lineup. And there is potential for more. The key stories on DraftKings at the center spot, with Okongwu landing in so many shares, realistically and totally justifiably, you're getting less than the field of everybody else. Jared Allen at 6,400 comes up in 30% of lineups. I'm sure sharing a bunch of those with Okongwu, just center util. Would have to be by the numbers here. We do have $3,200 Nick Richards there. The value on Richards on DraftKings at 5.93 is pretty significant. That's a better value score than the good value score at 5.18 that he's at on FanDuel. 26% below the field, could again see a little bit of an uptick, and he is a good per minute guy. 1.04 DraftKings points per minute this year, 1.02 last year. So when we see him out there for any kind of regular minutes, plenty of upside. Pirtle's down the board here. 5,500 on DK, did not hit the board. On FanDuel, we got him 2%. He's 5,400 on the FanDuel slate, and again, center only, but a lot of flexibility over there. But that's another example of, he's playing at 0.90 this year on DraftKings per minute, but he was a 1.16 guy last year. There's a lot of usage to go around among the starters there. But on a 3-game slate, there's no reason to believe that at that kind of a price, he couldn't put up a few additional fantasy points and very quickly change the shape of things. There's not exactly, it's just because of how things are shaped up here. There's not a ridiculous amount of daylight between his projection here and even the top projected guys. There's some. These guys are playing better per minute. Those guys are projected for more minutes. I've got Pirtle at 27. He's averaging just 24 a night in his 7 games. Last time out, 23.8, put up 21.3 FanDuel points to illustrate the point about the lighter production and the light minutes. So just by comparison to some of the guys who were projected for more minutes, better per minute performance, or both, he comes up a little light. Isaiah Jackson also looks better on FanDuel. 5.30 value score over there is noteworthy. He's another guy, 21 minutes. It's just that the minutes don't compare as favorably as with some of the other guys. But Jackson would be in my FanDuel rotation. He is a productive value guy, and he could give you upside at his per minute rates. He's another guy who's underperformed by comparison to his previous years. 1.24 per minute on FanDuel last year, 1.03 so far this year. Same usage, same everything. It's just a few, small sample happenstance. It's 11 games at 18 minutes a night. Anytime we see Isaiah Jackson crest over 20 minutes, he has the potential to put up a value score, and a significant one. So yeah, 3% level with the field on FanDuel. Considering that the field is so light on him, I wouldn't mind having him up to 10, 12% of a full FanDuel portfolio. If you're just building one lineup, there are probably better choices, but he's in the mix for GPP shares for sure on the FanDuel slate. At 4,900, he doesn't hit the board the same way on DraftKings. That's a 4.56 value score over there. He is, again, everybody like that is playable. Anybody with 20 plus minutes at that price absolutely is in play. But sim-wise, results through the most likely scenarios through our sim outputs in our top 150, didn't get him. Didn't come up, same as Pirtle. So it's just, the difference between playable, possible, and likely. And when you boil that down to a 3-game slate, it gets very, very sticky. Mohamed Gay, given Atlanta injuries, is he center eligible? I think he's just on the forward board, is he not? There he is. Yeah, so we got a significant share of him. He is center eligible. Was he on that list? And I just was... Oh, yep, he was third on that list. I started looking lower down because I assumed he wasn't one of the top-rated guys because he got asked about. I should have just started at the top of the list. Yeah, Gay's on the board for sure. 21 minutes projected, 4,100. I was thinking he was just forward eligible, but yeah, power forward and center eligibility definitely helps. He's over our value threshold significantly, 5.56. Not bad at all. We got him 27% of the time. That's really only coming up a little bit light just because we're getting so much of the other guys and we're taking a big position on the Okongwu shares. Again, this ran with the field, I believe, in like the lower mid-20s on Okongwu, which I think is definitely light for where the field will actually come up on that play. But since we're getting so much of that, it's dictating that some of the other guys are falling a little bit short of the field there. And it also, there's crossover ownership between the forward spots. But yeah, he's looking like a good piece. 0.96 per minute, 1.01 per minute on the on last year's full season. So slight underperformance in his minimal playing time this year, 17 minutes a night over 12 games. Seeing him for more minutes always benefits a guy like that, and he is a good per minute scorer from what we've seen. It's also a very good game environment going up against the worst team in basketball against Utah. So fantastic. Love the option for Mohamed Gay. Jared Allen, I think I kind of referred to him obliquely a little bit, but 31% on the DraftKings slate, just kind of looking like an is who he is spot. 18% on FanDuel. He was the lone guy from the main unit out there last night, if memory serves, and put up 33.9 in 26 minutes. He's just playing right around that 26 minutes a night. I've got him at 28. Give him a little bit of credit for more. Perfectly playable, plenty of upside, plenty of ceiling, but on a day where in the top end they're a little bit more whole, and in the front court they're a little bit more whole, he just looks like an is who he is kind of a spot. Nurk we talked about, but again, Nurk crucial to the FanDuel slate at 58% in the center-only spot. That is your go-to center-only guy, 5.93 value score. 27 minutes of 5,600 for Nurk, who can exceed those minutes, who can exceed the 1.13 that he's played at this year, 1.16 that he played at last year on any given slate. Gives you plenty of upside going back the other way in that game. So I like him coming back against and even in the same lineup, obviously, as the Okongwu shares. I think that wraps the center spot. Let's get the forwards on the board. Tiz saying, I think Indy and Phoenix are just going to play small because all the centers they haven't played tonight are atrocious. I like Jackson, but his floor time has been horrible. Yeah, that's the case. I mean, we've got wild card playing time on a lot of those big men, and I mentioned that with Richard Zigataro. There's just a lot of guys in those like 18 to 20 minute projections that any one of them could pop to 26 minutes. Any one of them could slide down to 14, 12 minutes. So a lot of wild cards in play on a tiny 3-gamer. Three of the 6 teams are on back-to-backs. Makes it challenging. It's the Cavs, the Hawks, and the Suns all on back-to-backs. Speaking of Hawks, Jalen Johnson up at the top of the board on both sites, 55% level with the field on DraftKings, 59%, and a little bit above the field on the FanDuel board. Fantastic option, 132 per minute so far this year on FanDuel, 133 on DraftKings. One of the top players just in general in a vacuum on the board, just any way you want to slice that equation. So is Lauri Markkanen. So is Evan Mobley. That's a good trio of guys, and they're all coming up aggressively. So all those shares that we were seeing going to some mid-price guys, some value guys on the DraftKings slate are helping pay for these three $8,000 guys. 83, 81, and 86 on DraftKings, 85, 79, and 88 on FanDuel. Not one of those guys really needs explanation as far as like this guy's a good NBA player. You can see it in the rates for all three of those guys. They are among the best rates overall on the entire slate. And the fact that they're coming up so aggressively against their position tells you everything you really need to know. There are other playable pieces here, though, of course. And we're getting some of them. Some are mixing in differently on FanDuel. But we're still getting that. Those are solid double-digit shares through all those guys. So outside of the peak here, we do get a nice distribution down through those guys. I'm sure there's mix across small forward, the forward spot, util. A lot of ability to flex things around on the DraftKings slate today. Mobley playing at 127 per minute this year, 129, just rock solid option. 44 points is one of the slate leaders overall, just shy of the $9,700 projection that we have on Pascal Siakam, who came up a lot lighter. For 1,100 more, you're talking about a 0.2 difference in their just raw median fantasy projection. So that's why you're undercutting Siakam there in that ownership distribution. But against that Phoenix squad, there's no reason to believe that Siakam couldn't go out there and just dominate that game. 1.28 per minute this year, up from 1.13 last year. Obviously, much more to do for him in Indy this year. Under the field at 11%. I think you're fine taking a little bit more if you want to level off to the field. I don't know if you want to get aggressively above the field, because I think the damage that does is probably limits you from the spots where you're getting like two. You could probably get like two of those guys, given the $1,100 price difference, with good values, where you have to make a more compromised value choice and take then Siakam and a guy who is like substandard to these guys. Right? It's probably like $6,700 Hunter maybe instead of one of those guys. And Hunter's fine. Hunter's coming up plenty, but I think that would be the difference if you got more over the field, it would be compromising some of those spots on those $8,000 guys on Siakam. But again, great play. Could potentially lead the slate in fantasy scoring pretty easily today. Royce O'Neal at 54 comes up as the solid mid-range piece that he is. Playing up a little bit so far this year, 0.95 per minute in his 30 minutes a night. Low usage guy. I always just get a little concerned around low usage guys some of the time, the collectors of fantasy points rather than the creators of fantasy points, as I like to refer to them. But 0.95 per minute this year, 0.88, even when he is not performing a little bit better like he has this year, he's a good enough fantasy contributor, and he's priced appropriately for that. Flexible across both forward positions as well. Miami Gay, we just talked about, but again, in the mix on both sites. I ignored FanDuel for him, by the way. We got 32% of them on the FanDuel board. That's above the field. The 5.56 value score over there is identical to the DraftKings score, despite the differences in what that actually means. So tremendous value opportunity on both sites. We're below the field at 27 on DraftKings. We're above the field at 32 on FanDuel. Risache just coming up in an is who he is spot. That is who he is much more meaningful on DraftKings, though. 5,200 both forward spots on FanDuel doesn't really impact the slate that much. 7%, that's level. If you want to push a few additional shares and take a minor position on a player like Risache, that's fine. 0.90 per minute this year, 0.86 last year, a 20% usage guy. Just a little bit more valuable to DraftKings. He's small forward only over there. It's not like he's truly valuable, right? Again, we're looking for 5 here, and he's only at 4.66, but we don't have a ton of guys outside of the big ones here. And those guys who do have good value scores are mostly power forward center. You've got the 505 there on Royce O'Neal. And then your next best option is that for small forward is that Reese Shea share. So he could Reese Shea share. That's a little bit difficult to say. 22% level with the field on the DraftKings slate. I think that makes sense. I don't think I want to get more aggressive than that on Reese Shea. 0.88 per minute. Yeah, they're missing some pieces, but I don't know that he's the guy necessarily that picks things up. Capable enough, but as far as slate breakers, I'm not sure that he's there. It is a good matchup again, going up against Utah. 27-minute projection. He could play a little bit north of that. For every additional minute he's out there at that price, he's going to pick up a little bit of value. And again, especially on DK. Hunter is who he is with like 80% of the regular unit there. I just think down a peg from some of those other Cavs options maybe, but playing up a notch this year as compared to last year. 1.07 on FanDuel versus 0.94. 1.11 on DK versus 0.98. Another guy who comes up more relevant in terms of raw shares on DraftKings, we got him 19% over there, but that's only level with the field at 67. I think he's just dropping into his fair share of lineups because he's appropriately priced. He's pretty likely to hit his mark, and he's just falling in alongside those, $8,000 guys, the value center and whatever else we're getting. But I don't think there's a special opportunity necessarily for Hunter on DraftKings. Just a good option to slot into a lineup at a fair price. On FanDuel, we're getting him 11% of the time. Less in the raw sense, but more against the field. That's up a little bit on the field. He's only a 4-5 value score. Again, we're making some value compromises immediately after the first couple options come up. But that's fine. With a guy like Hunter, that's fine. Again, 1.07, good enough for my money. 29 minutes the last time out, put up 30.8 FanDuel points. That's right about what we can expect today. I've got him at 31 minutes. Plenty of ground to cover there, so I don't mind it. An upside player in Scotty Barnes at a fair price at 86 FanDuel, 85 DraftKings. Scotty's playing 1.30 ball this year. 1.27 last year, slightly up. 1.33 on FanDuel versus 1.27 from last year. A lot of very equivalent mouths to feed there for Toronto, but I consider him the lead option. Ingram, 2 spots further down, is definitely very close. We got Ingram a little bit more raw shares wise on FanDuel, but both pretty fairly distributed and above the field. 22% of Barnes, 30% of Ingram, and again, above the field on both, but a slight bit more aggressively above the field on the cheaper Brandon Ingram. On the other side, 14% and below the field on Ingram because he's 77 versus the DK cap as opposed to 73 versus the FanDuel cap. And we got $8,500 Scotty, who's power forward only, at 18% and level with the field. So they're not as high quality over here, but either one of them is very, very playable. Either one of them is a contender to lead the slate in just raw fantasy point scoring. You can put both of them in the lineup, no problem. It's just there is a little bit of, as much as there are positively correlated opportunities for guys playing on the same teams, there's also an abundance of negative correlation when you've got all 4 of those guys kind of soaking up each other's usage, cannibalizing each other's numbers to some extent. And we've seen this with good teams with 4 good rotation pieces, and that, apologies to Pirtle, but is out of this conversation. We've seen that a lot in the past where it's just any given night, one of those guys is going to shine, one of those guys is going to be good, and then 2 of those guys are going to be a little bit below expectation. And there's no real ability to pinpoint which one it's going to be. But I do think that Scotty is our general leader just on our points per minute expectations overall. Grayson Allen, a fine mixer, 37% of them on FanDuel. A guy I never love seeing come up. He's another, low medium usage, 16.9% usage last year, just 14% this year. Got to get his hands on the ball to, make things happen, pick up a few steals, et cetera, et cetera. Grayson Allen numbers. In that, if I'm hunting for that kind of a guy on this slate, and it's a different type player, don't get me wrong, but give me Dyson Daniels every time. But that said, Allen's been undeniably good this year. 1.04 per minute, up from 0.85 last year on DraftKings. 1.0 on versus 0.82 on FanDuel. So there's plenty of opportunity there. He's a 32-minute player tonight, right in the mid-range. He's not inappropriately priced. The FanDuel price at 63 versus their cap is a lot better than the 68 that we're getting him at on DraftKings. Comes up at just 16% exposure there, and actually one of our hardest undercuts to the field on DraftKings. And I think that's just at the expense of, any of these better players. And then all these shares that we're just able to cram into those forward spots. And I'm perfectly fine with that. Again, I don't love getting the Grayson Allen shares. He just makes sense on this slate, especially on FanDuel. Neesmith just looking like a mixer on both, 7% below the field, gently on FanDuel, 13%. A little bit more of a firm undercut to the field. Again, small forward only versus multi-position on FanDuel. Look at all the literally everybody on the screen here has multi-position on FanDuel. Every single one of those guys. We're like 5 of them have until we get down to this range on DraftKings. That's wild. That creates a big, big difference. So Neesmith at small forward only for 61 versus cheaper price and flexibility on FanDuel. We got him. We got him 13% of the time, but that is a give back to the field as well. Again, we're just giving back some of the mid-range in favor of that upside among the forwards here. Talked about Siakam already, but again, it's Pascal Siakam. He is one of the most likely guys to lead the slate in fantasy scoring. Ryan Dunn, fair, 49, 50, 45. Rock solid 24 minutes a night, playing 0.93 on FanDuel, 0.90 this year, up a little bit, of about a tenth of a point per minute from last year. No problem with it. That's a good enough game environment. As somebody mentioned, everybody might play a little bit more on the small side there. So maybe we pick up a couple extra minutes for him. Grayson Allen or Nembhard is last man in for Rabbit Hole. Nembhard, what's Nembhard's position? Just guard? Just put everybody on the board. 66 point guard only. 20% of him versus what was it on Allen on DK? 16%. Looks like a little bit of a lean there toward Nembhard. Oops. We're at like 20% Nembhard. We were below the field on both, but that's a closer to the field, larger share overall on Nembhard here. And I believe that's what, 200 cheaper than, where's Allen? There's Allen. Yeah, there's Allen right there. And there's Nembhard. So you could save $200. Go to the guy who came up a little bit more. He's got a better value score at 4.87, technically a better raw projection by a quarter of a fantasy point, thereabouts, 0.35. So yeah, slight lean toward Nembhard without actually making you any kind of promises there. Nembhard's played at 1.04. That's up from 0.83. They're doing almost exactly the same thing head to head here. That's 1.04 up from 0.85, 1.04 up from 0.83. The truth is probably in between those two numbers for both of those guys. Nembhard maybe a little bit more to do. 16 and change usage this year versus the 14 on Allen, but Allen was 16 and right about the same, slightly more usage than Nembhard under normal circumstances last year. Very close, slightly in toward Nembhard. And then NYST Eagle Jay was saying Ricochet or Ace. I haven't said Ace Bailey's name yet. It's got to be in here somewhere. Where is Ace? Where he is. That's, I guess, going to lean Ricochet since we talked about him already. Where is he overall? Yeah, Ricochet way up here. 22% level with the field for the 51. And $4,800 Ace didn't really hit the board that hard. 0.78 per minute guy in the light sample that we have so far. Versus Ricochet, who we have a much larger sample playing a tenth of a point better per minute. Got Ricochet just a minute ahead. Ace is at a 26-minute projection here. He's only played 20 a night, but we've seen a slight uptick recently. $26, $28, $24 going back over the last three. So you could argue 28 easily enough for Ace with upside for an additional minute or two to up to like the 30 range that I wouldn't project, but you could project him for 28. But you could easily do the same thing with Ricochet. So I think the difference and the favor lies with Ricochet, especially when we got him level with the field. Right, we're just kind of coming up as just good play, reasonable option. So I think I slightly lean that way. Doug Gilly says, average 30,000 profit for 7 years playing DFS. Lost money my first 3 or 4 years, of course, but I lost 4,000 last year, and I'm getting hammered this year trying to figure out why. You have any insights on significant changes in DFS? The emergence of sim tools has made the field much more flat and kind of made it much more difficult to win. I think is the exact reason, Doug. The abundance of people, the number of people that are using sim tools at all went from a handful of us to, the industry. So it just made everything a lot sharper and just shaped the slates differently. So I think that's it. So the question there becomes like, how do you zig when they zag against something like that? And that's, right now proving very, very difficult. Yeah, sure thing, bud. It's something I think, a lot of us are struggling with. And, you see obviously the big players still doing well, and, bankroll certainly helps with that. But you have to bear in mind, you see a lot of results from the same sites, but when thousands and thousands of people are entering hundreds and hundreds of lineups apiece, it is very easy to get logos up at the top of the board. Doesn't necessarily mean the same people are winning. Obviously we do, again, have our regulars up toward the top of the board. There are people out there who are very, very good at this. Don't get me wrong. And those people are still able to cut through. And that becomes a matter of just, the fine art of getting these projections nailed down, knowing these minutes, just by rote. I consider myself good at it, but there are people that are better than I am at it. And those people, can squeak out a little bit of edge even against the sims, because that just gets you slightly more on point. So the better we can do at this, the better we can do at that. But yeah, I think the sim tools really, really, shrunk the industry as far as the broad fields you used to get. So what it does is like you're just competing against a sharper field, right? So it's getting more lineups in your way. It's getting more common builds in your way. And, there are more people on that path. So then when you spread that out across 50,000 lineups, just the odds that a couple of those people are just going to land with by mistake, almost the correct plays in line with the 6 common plays that make up 80% of the lineups in the field. It just creates more opportunity for the right, 80% of the lineup to be built for everyone. And then the lottery of who got those 3 plays right and dropped them in, if that makes sense. Not to make, excuses for anybody's numbers. We all got to figure out ways to overcome. But yeah, I do think that's why. Let's wrap up the rest of the forwards here, coming up on almost 5 o'clock. Still got to get hockey projections up on the site. So we'll bail out of here soon. I think we're mostly done with forwards, right? We talked, we were just about to get to Ace Bailey when I pulled off those discussions. He was literally the next guy. I was on Ryan Dunn. Luke Kennard, little mixy matchy, a very differentiated Dylan Brooks from site to site. We got him 30% and above the field at a 499 value score for that 53 on FanDuel. He's a $6,200 player on DraftKings. He does have the multi-position, which today is a little bit thin. So you get a little flex on him, but he only came up 5% of the time. That's lighter than the field. I think you could take a few extra shares if you just need a guy to fill out a lineup. And I will note that he's playing 1.05 basketball over his 6 games this year since coming back. 29 minutes a night. I've got him at 30, 29.3 technically. I've got him at 30 tonight. I think that number is very much the product of the small sample. We've had Dylan Brooks for a while now, and we know that he's typically 0.75 type guy. 17.6% usage is exactly the same number of usage that he had from last year. So it's not like he's, suddenly getting all these opportunities at looks. He's just Dylan Brooks out there, and it's just a small sample of 6 games where he's played a little bit aggressively ahead of the points per minute that we would expect. Over time, that's going to unwind. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to not be at 105 or better tonight. So opportunity there, but another, low end per minute guy needs to get his hands on the ball, find some points through defense, through hustle plays, et cetera, et cetera. Filipowski is who he is spot, and that is not all that meaningful to the slate. Didn't get him at all on FanDuel. Below the field at 3% on DraftKings. If you want more for some reason, you can take more. He's a 21-minute guy right now. Larry Nance, mix and matchy at best 3% below the field, even though he's 39 on DraftKings. Not much opportunity there. Dean Wade, not giving you much. But again, any one of these guys, especially if you're building a solid handful of lineups at these cheap prices, everybody in this range here is 4,000. Any one of those guys is a viable replacement value guy for anybody else who's projected in that same minutes range with, reasonable 0.8, 0.9 up to 1.0 per minute types through there. So any one of those guys is playable tonight. Shares of JRE can go into a lineup, 22 minutes, getting some starts lately. Not a major opportunity as far as minutes beyond that for him, but getting some starting opportunity. Wade is perfectly playable. Could see a few additional minutes with some missing pieces, depending on how things go. But, they're coming off a night off for a lot of guys on a back-to-back, the second night of a back-to-back. Ben Shepherd in 20 minutes could give you a little bit more minutes-wise, but he's not a good per-minute guy. 0.63 this year, 0.66 last year. Super low usage at 12.5% this year, 10.8 last year. So just, again, another fairly low-end guy. So what I would try and identify in there, and that's the catch with all these guys, everybody that I was just talking about, below average usage. But you want to try and at least identify where at least some opportunity for usage, some opportunity for additional minutes might come from when you're just making those value pivots. But any of those dudes can land in a couple few lineups, and you could be slightly above the field on any one of them. We're getting below the field on them, on the entire group. But let's say since we're closest to the field here at 39 on, who is that, Larry Nance, and he's the cheapest of the group, if you wanted to say sacrifice all three of those positions and take that 15 or 12, 15 points and soak it into Larry Nance shares just because you've got a hunch that he's going to play an additional 4 minutes tonight, that's worth doing. And there's no real mistake being made because you're already below the field. You're just sacrificing this random dude did go off. Dylan Brooks did go off at a bad price. So you're taking that out of your lotto, but you're building a different case in your lotto. You don't want to be doing that with these guys, though, right? You're not sacrificing these guys to get those guys. Any one lineup share, fine. But that is a totally different thing. I'm talking about, directly these guys right here, 1 for 1, 2 for 2 swaps back and forth between them. Perfectly fine to do. So you don't need all of them. If you want to take a position on any given one, it doesn't have to be Larry Nance. That was just my example. But there is opportunity to do that. Let's jump over to the guards and wrap this thing up. We've talked about a handful of these guys already. Again, Craigie Porter sitting up toward the top of the board, just very, very cheap at 3,300. It's only a 21-minute projection, but he's played more than that in a few spots already this year. Just last night, in fact, in the shorthanded game, he played, 32? Where the hell is he? There he is. Yeah, 32. Just 5 the game before that, 4 the game before that, because it was basically all hands on deck, but 16, 18, a couple games into the 20 minutes where, just varying guys in and out of the lineup. And specifically with no Lonzo, no Garland, I think there's plenty of opportunity for him to get in the mix here. So that's just a good price, good value building block there on DraftKings, 61%. I think he's going to climb the board as far as actual popularity versus what he was projected for here, but that 60 will probably still be a nice chunk ahead of the field. On FanDuel, he's just a guy. 17%, gently above the field at 42. Very, very playable, but only a 4.80 value score. So it just doesn't compare as much as he does, or it doesn't compare nearly as well as he does on DraftKings. Mentioned Dyson Daniels before, playing 0.94 basketball so far this year, 1.09 last year. 12.3% usage versus 17.8 last year. Definite dip in usage. Hasn't gotten his hands on the ball quite as much, but we know he's capable of dropping those, 7 stock games into the mix from time to time, and that's where he creates a ton of fantasy points, and Ben Slates do as well. He's a very good fantasy player in general, and I expect over the course of the season we're going to get back over point per minute and change. Better FanDuel player overall than a DraftKings player, but we're getting him a little bit more on DraftKings, and we're getting him closer to the field on DraftKings because of that, he's a little bit cheaper. He's also only point guard eligible on DK, 4.99 value score. We got him at 34% below the field there. We also got below the field on Nickeil Alexander-Walker coming out of that same backcourt. 6,000 shooting guard only, 4.90 value. They are looking very same. We got them similar distributions, both lighter than the field while coming up pretty significantly. No issues playing both of them, especially on a 3-gamer. You can put them both in the same lineup. Don't fully trust Alexander Walker. He's another guy who's played well so far this year at 0.97 in 30 minutes a night over 10 games, but he's a 0.79 per minute guy from our samples where we truly have seen more of him and what we know of him. So is he capable of more than that? Absolutely. Is it going to be 0.97 in the long term? Probably not. But somewhere in between those two numbers is probably the truth. I think it's plenty fine to play around the field. If you're below perfect. But if you're around the field into the 40% range, you're probably okay. 55% on FanDuel. He's much more critical of the FanDuel slate because he's only 5,500 over there. He's also got the multi-position shooting guard and point guard. 5.23. He is our most valuable point per dollar FanDuel guard. Not FanDuel player overall, but among the guards. He's also our biggest position at 55%. That's aggressively ahead of the field. Given what I just said about his low per minute production and what we know of him from years past, I don't love that. But I'll play it, especially in a game against Utah. That should be open enough. So yeah, it's there. We've been getting over the last couple, and I think that's not going to change for the foreseeable future, especially at these prices. So definitely going to have some. I think you could easily pare that down a little bit. Call the field that number probably 30%. So if you want to bring it down 10 to 45, even down to 40, and maintain a smaller position while still being ahead of the field, I think that's a fair approach. And then you just can slide some of those shares around the board, not necessarily to Jordan Goodwin, who's next here, but certainly down in this territory with some similarly priced guys. We did get Goodwin on DraftKings. That's why he's up here. 3,500 just comps as another value building block. Point guard and shooting guard also is interesting at the very cheap price. Again, just not a lot of flexibility on the board on DK today. 5.19 is over our value threshold. It's just him and Craig Porter above the value threshold among all these guards. $9,300 Devin Booker is just short of it, 4.98. $7,300 Dyson Daniels is just short of it, 4.99. We're getting an abundance of both of those guys too. And we could probably push additional Booker shares. If you're willing to get frisky with multiple $3,000 guys into your lineup, that's your direct path into getting additional Booker shares. We got him 21%, but below the field. That's one of the more aggressive undercuts. But it's also one of the better overall players. 1.24 per minute this year, 1.16 on DK last year. Wouldn't mind having a little bit of additional shares of Booker in that game against Indy here. Tiz is saying any entry fee under $5 should be forced to enter via mobile device so they're hand built. Easier way to do that would just be eliminate CSV entry for anything that's, let's say, $3 or less, or less than $3. Do it on the same restriction where they do if you've made a certain amount of money, you can't play in contests under this price, and that's under $3, or at least on FanDuel it is. I don't know what that number is on DraftKings. So if you did it in that range, I think that would actually be a very fair thing to do. In the higher range, which unfortunately is where more of the people are obviously good players and using those products, I think it would be a bigger change that wouldn't go down well. So I'm not sure they'd be able to do it. But you could certainly, you've got single entry for one thing. But you could certainly do, no CSV entry contests just as like a special thing that just sits on the site to try and normalize the fields a little bit. It's just a matter of how much time do people have? And that's where, again, a lot of the working Joes are going to suffer against the pros who are just sitting home building lineups all day because those guys have time to hand build 150. What you don't have is time to edit a hand 150 as things change toward lock. So that's where we get really, really interesting. But yeah, it's not a terrible suggestion. And we had that, in the past. No, we didn't have CSV upload. We didn't have late swap. We didn't, back and forth. Yeah, it was worth a thought in a moment's discussion for sure. It says. Doug's saying, I want to trust Porter, but my gut tells me there isn't much difference between his value and Richards or Goodwin. Yeah, I agree. And I think the Sims are telling us similar things. I don't trust him. Trust is easily the wrong word. But he squeaks out those additional shares by virtue of being the cheapest guy showing upside value. Right? But that 613 value, there was another somebody. Yeah, we got a 593 down there on Richards at the 3,200. But that is a little bit of a blocker, not a full blocker, to some of the upside players we want to get to. So it kind of depends on what your compromise is there. And your upside players among the big men, and I'm just kind of lumping them all into the same space, are a little bit more affordable. They're like these guys in the 8s, the 7s, than your upside players at the guard spot. So it just looks like the natural product through the Sims, where you're getting these two in the 9s, Booker and Donovan Mitchell, who are your two biggest guards on the slate. You're getting those guys a little bit less and the value guards a little bit more. and you're getting the good player bigs and the value bigs a little bit more. So it's just a matter of how the slate's configured. But again, any given lineup, you can absolutely take that the other way, and especially on a small, little 3-gamer like this. So just as a direct, immediate pivot, yeah, you take that Richard Serra at 32. If you're building a lineup that only has one value building block in it, which you could probably get away with today, take that, put it in at center, take one of the big guards here, go against the field a little bit. Both these guys are lower owned by the field as well by comparison. And there's your pivot. Or Mama Gay is another example of that. He's not as cheap, but he's coming up plenty. Yeah, this is one of the more flexible slates we've had so far this year. So plenty of opportunity to move pieces around the board like that. But I think, based on just what we're seeing in this set of sim results, that would be the why behind why we're seeing so much on the Proctor side, or the Porter side rather. Proctor's right here, by the way, and less so on Richards, even though they're showing roughly equivalent value at very low prices. It's a product of what the other guys are doing. But again, you absolutely can get aggressive. Any given share of Booker, Mitchell definitely looks good. We're more aggressive on the FanDuel slate at 92.95, 39% and level with the field on Book, 46% and well above the field. I'm very interested in that result on Donovan Mitchell. 1.38 per minute on FanDuel, 1.26 last year. That's one of our slate leaders as far as per minute scoring just across the entire board. So the fact that we're that aggressively ahead of a well-rested Donovan Mitchell, that looks like a great opportunity on FanDuel to me. 20% of them gently below the field on DraftKings. You can absolutely take more. Another player who's just very, very capable of leading the slate in raw fantasy scoring. And on a 3-gamer, you end up needing that. RJ, we talked about that mix of Toronto guys when we broke down the forwards, but there's RJ and there's IQ. Again, you're going to have your days for each of these guys. No surprise to see 13% IQ, 18% RJ, and below the field on both, but a little bit more gentle on RJ, $7,100 shooting guard versus just the point guard, the shares that are going into $3,300 Craig Porter, $7,300 Dyson Daniels above are just soaking up a lot more. So no surprises there. Either one of those guys perfectly capable, either one of those guys capable of leading the Raptors in scoring tonight from a fantasy sense. Everybody's getting like lower mid-20s usage. If memory serves, it goes Scotty, Ingram, RJ, quickly. Do I have that right? At least between these two, I do have that right. It might be RJ over Ingram in the full sense, but I think when all 4 of them are out there, Ingram slides ahead of RJ, if I'm remembering that accurately from what I saw yesterday or 2 days ago or whenever that was. In between those two, we talked about Grayson Allen, Sammy Merrill. Coming up a little bit, 26 minutes. Again, anybody with 26 minutes is a gem tonight. 16% at 5,000 totally works. 4.63, nothing special. Is who he is, kind of a spot as far as the player and the opportunity goes. But that is a fair price from a decent enough mid-range guy. 0.88 per minute is up a little bit from 0.75 last year. Usage crept up slightly at 17% from 14% last year, and might have a couple additional shots in his bag tonight. So nothing wrong with the Merrill play on either site. We got him 11% level with the field on FanDuel. We did not get Tyrese Proctor. He's at a 20-minute projection for $3,700. That's on FanDuel. We got him 16% of the time because he's the dead min price on DraftKings. So again, there's not a crazy amount of daylight. If that $300 becomes meaningful, his nearly 15-point projection is a 5-point projection difference. There's a big value difference, obviously. Those 5 points are meaningful, but so could that $300 be. So if you can make up those 5 fantasy points in your pivot, there's nothing wrong with dipping down the board. He's also got multi-position eligibility. There's nothing wrong with playing him right alongside Craig Porter, just taking all those minutes from the one position. 16% and level with the field on the DK board. Keontae George, perfectly fine per minute guy, 115 DK, 111 on FanDuel. We got him a little lighter than the field on both. Bigger undercut on DraftKings at 10% or 11. 15% gently undercut to the field on FanDuel. 32 minutes, any of the starters obviously at fair prices today, though, in play for sure. And then Colin Gillespie, we got a 20% on FanDuel and slightly above the field, just showing better value at 486 versus the FanDuel threshold instead of 473 against DraftKings for 5,100. 10% below the field on DK. Playing well, 1.09 up from 1.02. Not going to be a slate breaker or not going to be maximum scorer on the slate, but capable of giving you good value for that 5,100 and bending the slate through the middle of it, adding pressure to the slate. I don't know how the right way to say that is. Luke Kennard is who he is. Keaton Wallace is who he is. Svi, sure. $4,000 Svi in 27 minutes. Again, it's 0.67 at 15% usage is not going to break the slate. 0.77 at 19.8 also wouldn't have broken the slate as numbers from last year, but he's a capable enough guy at a fair price. Also, multi-position on FanDuel does help. Shooting guard only at 45 on DraftKings. We did not get Svi. TJ McConnell, what did he play in the first game? 11-4, light. 16 minutes projected today. I think I had him at 18 the other day. Was reluctant to take him into the 20s, and fortunately, because he's a very good per minute player when he's on the court. Even in that 11 minutes, played 1.29. So if you happen to get the day where something happens and TJ sees additional minutes on a 3-gamer, that could very quickly bend your slate. Additionally, in 23 minutes, I looked down the line. We got him, but just 1% of the time on FanDuel in 16 minutes. Got him in one share across 150 on DraftKings. Isaiah Collier, though, 23 minutes at 4,400 is kind of working out on FanDuel. And that's kind of where the difference is, right? If you evened out those minutes, I would much rather have TJ McConnell at 46. You don't expect those minutes to even out, but there is a path to it. So a couple additional shares of TJ in your pocket in any given lineup is fine. You probably don't need to get that aggressive on Collier at 35, but that's well above the field. So you can shave that down somewhat, still have an advantage to the field on what does look like a good value play. Again, we're looking for 5.03. So he's one of 3 guards. The other 2 are on Atlanta up at the top of the board there. He's one of 3 guards that we have above the value threshold on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's a 4.22 value because he costs 5,300 over there. He's a radically different play on the DK slate. 1.03 per minute so far in limited action, 3 games, 23 minutes a night, 0.90 in more action last year. Good enough, capable fantasy guy. Just more valuable at the cheap 4,400 on FanDuel, though. Nope, had it right the first time, Doug. There is with a ERE in that context. There's a large group of people that will always be hand builders because they have a great deal of people that have knowledge and instinct and insist on trusting that over a for-profit company. Sure. I mean, the last part of that, like, there's no reason to, not trust the stochastics and Osmos of the world, the RGs of the world, just depending on, which one you think is better, which one you get better results from. But they're not doing nefarious things out there, trying to mislead people. But yeah, there's, to me, I think very strong value in, using stuff from Roto Scouts. That's a much smaller group that's getting slightly different numbers while being very, very good, accurate numbers that by and large will compare very favorably with anybody out there. And especially in basketball, that's definitely what you want. But minor differences, minor tweaks in minutes. I noticed something that in minutes wise that somebody else might not have noticed. It creates a slight difference. And that difference creates a slight uptick in your shares or a slight downgrade in your shares that you're exposed to. And the same thing is true of just, flat out creating your own, like you said, if you're capable of doing that. So yeah, I think there's tons and tons of value in that. And that's the opportunity to gain some edge. So that is why I think going to just the direct biggest place and using the same numbers from the biggest place that everybody is, or the couple biggest places. That's why there's so much common think, but common think in basketball specifically is a good thing. Or it's the mathematically correct thing, right? We talk about that a lot over the years with, the optimal projection path. And as we've developed these different approaches of finding, target scores and all the things we used to do, so you see that, and we've really, really distilled it down to good groupthink and good numbers across the industry for basketball. For other sports, baseball, obviously, hockey, you get total chaos and randomness once the games start, and you do in basketball, but within a more normalized sense. So, injecting more chaos into the process for especially like baseball is a good thing, I think. And then the one that's kind of in between is football, because that's very event-based and rate-based across different positions. So you see more commonality of projection, I think, in the football projections. But basketball is the place where it's going to be closest. So you can pick up those minor differences and get very, very different than the industry through only a small change in somebody's projection one spot versus the other spot. And if that's going to be the case, you want to be with the smaller group, right? That's where you're going to pick up major advantage by being with the smaller population of people who have that difference. Even if it's wrong more often than it's not, the amount of upside that you gain out of it would be significant. Obviously, I don't have numbers to prove that, but I think it makes sense. Just thinking of this off the top of my head. With that, I think good case to check out rotoscouts.com. Everything's under $1 a day. Basketball, hockey, and football. I got to go get hockey projections done right now. About halfway through them. It's a big slate. It's 5:15. So let me get out of here. Get that wrapped up. I'll get basketball updates up on the website in the next little bit as well. Thank you guys very much. Good questions today. Really appreciate all the thumbs up, the subscriptions on the website and here on YouTube. You guys absolutely rock. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. Share those results when you do at RotoScouts on Twitter or in the free premium Discord. Even if you're not subscribing, jump into the Discord, come hang out, join the community. Fun times. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Bigger slate tomorrow. NBA Cup, I believe, tomorrow as well. Always makes things interesting. Good luck out there, gang. See you.